A Horseman in the Sky by Ambrose Bierce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. One sunny afternoon in the autumn of the year 1861, a soldier lay in a clump of laurel by the side of a road in western Virginia. He lay at full length upon his stomach, his feet resting upon the toes, his head upon the left forearm. His extended right hand loosely grasped his rifle. But for the somewhat methodical disposition of his limbs and a slight rhythmic movement of the cartridge box at the back of his belt, he might have been thought to be dead. He was asleep at his post of duty, but if detected, he would be dead shortly afterward, death being the just and legal penalty of his crime. The clump of laurel in which the criminal lay was in the angle of a road, which, after ascending southward a steep acclivity to that point, turned sharply to the west, running along the summit for perhaps 100 yards. There it turned southward again and went zigzagging downward through the forest. At the salient of that second angle was a large flat rock jutting out northward, overlooking the deep valley from which the road ascended. The rock capped a high cliff. A stone dropped from its outer edge would have fallen sheer downward 1,000 feet to the tops of the pines. The angle where the soldier lay was on another spur of the same cliff. Had he been awake, he would have commanded a view not only of the short arm of the road and the jutting rock, but of the entire profile of the cliff below it. It might well have made him giddy to look. The country was wooded everywhere, except at the bottom of the valley to the northward, where there was a small natural meadow, through which flowed a stream, scarcely visible from the valley's rim. This open ground looked hardly larger than an ordinary dooryard, but was really several acres in extent. Its green was more vivid than that of the enclosing forest. Away beyond it rose a line of giant cliffs, similar to those upon which we are supposed to stand in our survey of the savage scene, and through which the road had somehow made its climb to the summit. The configuration of the valley indeed was such that from this point of observation it seemed entirely shut in, and one could but have wondered how the road which found a way out of it had found a way into it, and whence came and whither went the waters of a stream that parted the meadow more than 1,000 feet below. No country is so wild and difficult but men will make a theater of war. Concealed in the forest at the bottom of that military rat-trap, in which 100 men in possession of the exits might have starved an army to submission, lay 5 regiments of Federal infantry. They had marched all the previous day and night and were resting. At nightfall they would take to the road again, climb to the place where their unfaithful sentinel now slept, and descending the other slope of the ridge, fall upon a camp of the enemy at about midnight. Their hope was to surprise it, for the road led to the rear of it. In case of failure, their position would be perilous in the extreme, and fail they surely would should accident or vigilance apprise the enemy of the movement. The sleeping sentinel in the clump of laurel was a young Virginian named Carter Druse. He was the son of wealthy parents, an only child, and had known such ease and cultivation and high living as wealth and taste were able to command in the mountain country of western Virginia. His home was but a few miles from where he now lay. One morning he had risen from the breakfast table and said quietly but gravely, "Father, a Union regiment has arrived at Grafton. I'm going to join it." The father lifted his leonine head, looked at the son a moment in silence, and replied, "Well, go, sir. And whatever may occur, do what you conceive to be your duty. Virginia, to which you are a traitor, must get on without you. Should we both live to the end of the war, we will speak further of the matter. Your mother, as the physician has informed you, is in a most critical condition. At the best, she cannot be with us longer than a few weeks, but that time is precious. It would be better not to disturb her." So Carter Druse, bowing reverently to his father, who returned the salute with a stately courtesy that masked a breaking heart, left the home of his childhood to go soldiering. By conscience and courage, by deeds of devotion and daring, he soon commended himself to his fellows and his officers. and it was to these qualities and to some knowledge of the country that he owed his selection for his present perilous duty at the extreme outpost. Nevertheless, fatigue had been stronger than resolution, and he had fallen asleep. What good or bad angel came in a dream to rouse him from his state of crime, who shall say? Without a movement, without a sound, in that profound silence and the languor of the late afternoon, some invisible messenger of fate touched with unsealing finger the eyes of his consciousness, whispered into the ear of his spirit the mysterious awakening word which no human lips ever have spoken, no human memory ever has recalled. He quietly raised his forehead from his arm and looked between the masking stems of the laurels, instinctively closing his right hand about the stock of his rifle. His first feeling was a keen artistic delight. On a colossal pedestal, the cliff, motionless at the extreme edge of the capping rock and sharply outlined against the sky, was an equestrian statue of impressive dignity. The figure of the man sat the figure of the horse, straight and soldierly, but with the repose of a Grecian god carved in the marble, which limits the suggestion of activity. The gray costume harmonized with its aerial background. The metal of accoutrement and caparison was softened and subdued by the shadow. The animal's skin had no points of highlight. A carbine, strikingly foreshortened, lay across the pommel of the saddle, kept in place by the right hand grasping it at the grip. The left hand, holding the bridle rein, was invisible. In silhouette against the sky, the profile of the horse was cut with the sharpness of a cameo. It looked across the heights of air to the confronting cliffs beyond. The face of the rider, turned slightly away, showed only an outline of temple and beard. He was looking downward to the bottom of the valley. Magnified by its lift against the sky, and by the soldier's testifying sense of the formidableness of a near enemy, the group appeared of heroic, almost colossal size. For an instant, Druse had a strange, half-defined feeling that he had slept to the end of the war, and was looking upon a noble work of art reared upon that eminence to commemorate the deeds of a heroic past, of which he had been an inglorious part. The feeling was dispelled by a slight movement of the group. The horse, without moving its feet, had drawn its body slightly backward from the verge. The man remained immobile as before. Broad awake, and keenly alive to the significance of the situation, Druse now brought the butt of his rifle against his cheek by cautiously pushing the barrel forward through the bushes, cocked the piece, and, glancing through the sights, covered a vital spot on the horseman's breast. A touch upon the trigger, and all would have been well with Carter Druse. At that instant the horseman turned his head and looked in the direction of his concealed foeman, seemed to look into his very face, into his eyes, into his brave, compassionate heart. Is it, then, so terrible to kill an enemy in war? An enemy who has surprised a secret vital to the safety of oneself and comrades? An enemy more formidable for his knowledge than all his army for its numbers? Carter Druse grew pale. He shook in every limb, turned faint, and saw the statuesque group before him as black figures, rising, falling, moving unsteadily in arcs of circles in a fiery sky. His hand fell away from his weapon. His head slowly dropped until his face rested on the leaves in which he lay. This courageous gentleman and hardy soldier was near swooning from intensity of emotion. It was not for long. In another moment his face was raised from the earth. His hands resumed their places on the rifle. His forefinger sought the trigger. Mind, heart, and eyes were clear. Conscience and reason sound. He could not hope to capture that enemy. To alarm him would but send him dashing to his camp with his fatal news. The duty of a soldier was plain. The man must be shot dead from ambush. Without warning, without a moment's spiritual preparation, with never so much as an unspoken prayer, he must be sent to his account. But no, there is a hope. He may have discovered nothing. Perhaps he is but admiring the sublimity of the landscape. If permitted, he may turn and ride carelessly away in the direction whence he came. Surely it will be possible to judge at the instant of his withdrawing whether he knows. It may well be that his fixity of attention. Druse turned his head and looked through the deeps of air downward, as from the surface to the bottom of a translucent sea. He saw creeping across the green meadow a sinuous line of figures of men and horses. Some foolish commander was permitting the soldiers of his escort to water their beasts in the open, in plain view from a dozen summits. Druse withdrew his eyes from the valley, and fixed them again upon the group of the man and horse in the sky, and again it was through the sights of his rifle. But this time his aim was at the horse. In his memory, as if they were a divine mandate, rang the words of his father at their parting: "Whatever may occur, do what you conceive to be your duty." He was calm now. His teeth were firmly but not rigidly closed. His nerves were as tranquil as a sleeping babe's. Not a tremor affected any muscle of his body. His breathing, until suspended in the act of taking aim, was regular and slow. Duty had conquered. The spirit had said to the body, "Peace, be still." He fired. An officer of the Federal force, who, in a spirit of adventure or in quest of knowledge, had left the hidden bivouac in the valley, and with aimless feet had made his way to the lower edge of a small open space near the foot of the cliff, was considering what he had to gain by pushing his exploration farther. At a distance of a quarter-mile before him, but apparently at a stone's throw, rose from its fringe of pines the gigantic face of rock, towering to so great a height above him that it made him giddy to look up to where its edge cut a sharp, rugged line against the sky. It presented a clean vertical profile against a background of blue sky to a point half the way down, and of distant hills hardly less blue thence to the tops of the trees at its base. Lifting his eyes to the dizzy altitude of its summit, the officer saw an astonishing sight: a man on horseback riding down into the valley through the air. Straight upright sat the rider, in military fashion, with a firm seat in the saddle, a strong clutch upon the rein to hold his charger from too impetuous a plunge. From his bare head his long hair streamed upward, waving like a plume. His hands were concealed in the cloud of the horse's lifted mane. The animal's body was as level as if every hoof stroke encountered the resistant earth. Its motions were those of a wild gallop, but even as the officer looked they ceased, with all the legs thrown sharply forward as if the act of alighting from a leap. But this was a flight. Filled with amazement and terror by this apparition of a horseman in the sky, half believing himself the chosen scribe of some new apocalypse, the officer was overcome by the intensity of his emotions. His legs failed him, and he fell. Almost at the same instant he heard a crashing sound in the trees, a sound that died without echo, and all was still. The officer rose to his feet trembling. The familiar sensation of an abraded shin recalled his dazed faculties. Pulling himself together, he ran rapidly, obliquely away from the cliff to a point distant from its foot. Thereabout he expected to find his man, and thereabout he naturally failed. In the fleeting instant of his vision his imagination had been so wrought upon by the apparent grace and ease and intention of that marvelous performance that it did not occur to him that the line of march of aerial cavalry is directly downward, and that he could find the objects of his search at the very foot of the cliff. A half an hour later he returned to camp. This officer was a wise man. He knew better than to tell an incredible truth. He said nothing of what he had seen, but when the commander asked him if in his scout he had learned anything of advantage to the expedition, he answered, "Yes, sir. There is no road leading down into this valley from the southward." The commander, knowing better, smiled. After firing his shot, Private Carter Druse reloaded his rifle and resumed his watch. 10 minutes had hardly passed when a Federal sergeant crept cautiously to him on hands and knees. Druse neither turned his head nor looked at him, but lay without motion or sign of recognition. "Did you fire?" the sergeant whispered. "Yes." "At what?" "A horse. It was standing on yonder rock, pretty far out. You see, it is no longer there. It went over the cliff." The man's face was white, but he showed no other sign of emotion. Having answered, he turned away his eyes and said no more. The sergeant did not understand. "See here, Druse," he said after a moment's silence. It's no use making a mystery. I order you to report. Was there anybody on the horse?" "Yes." "Well?" "My father." The sergeant rose to his feet and walked away. "Good God," he said. End of A Horseman in the Sky by Ambrose Bierce.
Michael, a Pastoral Poem by William Wordsworth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Michael, a Pastoral Poem. If from the public way you turn your steps up the tumultuous brook of Greenhead Gill, you will suppose that with an upright path your feet must struggle. In such bold ascent the pastoral mountains front you face to face. But courage! For beside that boisterous brook the mountains have all opened out themselves and made a hidden valley of their own. No habitation there is seen, but such as journey thither find themselves alone with a few sheep, with rocks and stones and kites that overhead are sailing in the sky. It is in truth an utter solitude. Nor should I have made mention of this dell but for one object which you might pass by, might see and notice not. Beside the brook there is a straggling heap of unhewn stones, and to that place a story appertains, which, though it be ungarnished with events, is not unfit, I deem, for the fireside or for the summer shade. It was the first, the earliest of those tales that spake to me of shepherds, dwellers in the valleys, men whom I already loved, not verily for their own sakes, but for the fields and hills where was their occupation and abode. And hence this tale, while I was yet a boy, careless of books, yet having felt the power of nature, by the gentle agency of natural objects, led me on to feel for passions that were not my own, and think at random and imperfectly indeed on man, the heart of man and human life. Therefore, although it be a history homely and rude, I will relate the same for the delight of a few natural hearts, and with yet fonder feeling for the sake of youthful poets, who among these hills will be my second self when I am gone. Upon the forest side in Grasmere Vale there dwelt a shepherd. Michael was his name. An old man, stout of heart and strong of limb. His bodily frame had been from youth to age of an unusual strength. His mind was keen, intense, and frugal, apt for all affairs, and in his shepherd's calling he was prompt and watchful more than ordinary men. Hence he had learned the meaning of all winds, of blasts of every tone, and oftentimes when others heeded not, he heard the south make subterraneous music, like the noise of bagpipers on distant Highland hills. The shepherd at such warning of his flock bethought him, and he to himself would say, "The winds are now devising work for me." And truly at all times the storm, that drives the traveller to a shelter, summoned him up to the mountains. He had been alone amid the heart of many thousand mists that came to him and left him on the heights. So lived he till his 80th year was past. And grossly that man errs who should suppose that the green valleys and the streams and rocks were things indifferent to the shepherd's thoughts. Fields where with cheerful spirits he had breathed the common air, the hills which he so oft had climbed with vigorous steps, which had impressed so many incidents upon his mind of hardship, skill, or courage, joy, or fear, which, like a book, preserved the memory of the dumb animals whom he had saved, had fed or sheltered, linking to such acts so grateful in themselves the certainty of honorable gains. These fields, these hills, which were his living being, even more than his own blood (what could they less?), had laid strong hold on his affections, were to him a pleasurable feeling of blind love, the pleasure which there is in life itself. He had not passed his days in singleness. He had a wife, a comely matron, old, though younger than himself, full 20 years. She was a woman of a stirring life, whose heart was in her house. 2 wheels she had of antique form, this large for spinning wool, that small for flax, and if one wheel had rest, it was because the other was at work. The pair had but one inmate in their house, an only child, who had been born to them when Michael, telling o'er his years, began to deem that he was old, in shepherd's phrase, with one foot in the grave. This only son, with 2 brave sheepdogs tried in many a storm. The one of an inestimable worth made all their household. I may truly say that they were as a proverb in the vale for endless industry. When day was gone, and from their occupations out of doors the son and father were come home, even then their labor did not cease, unless when all turned to their cleanly supper-board, and there, each with a mess of pottage and skimmed milk, sat round their basket piled with oaten cakes and their plain home-made cheese. Yet when their meal was ended, Luke, for so the son was named, and his old father, both betook themselves to such convenient work as might employ their hands by the fireside, perhaps to card wool for the housewife's spindle, or repair some injury done to sickle, flail, or scythe, or other implement of house or field. Down from the circling by the chimney's edge, which in our ancient uncouth country style did with a huge projection overbrow large space beneath, as duly as the light of day grew dim, the housewife hung a lamp, an aged utensil which had performed service beyond all others of its kind. Early at evening did it burn, and late, surviving comrade of uncounted hours, which going by from year to year had found and left the couple neither gay, perhaps, nor cheerful, yet with objects and with hopes, living a life of eager industry. And now, when Luke was in his 18th year, there by the light of this old lamp they sat, father and son, while late into the night the housewife plied her own peculiar work, making the cottage through the silent hours murmur as with the sound of summer flies. Not with a waste of words, but for the sake of pleasure, which I know that I shall give to many living now, I of this lamp speak thus minutely, for there are no few whose memories will bear witness to my tale. The light was famous in its neighborhood, and was a public symbol of the life the thrifty pair had lived. For, as it chanced, their cottage on a plot of rising ground stood single, with large prospect north and south, high into Easdale, up to Dunmall Raise, and westward to the village near the lake. And from this constant light, so regular and so far seen, the house itself by all who dwelt within the limits of the vale, both young and old, was named the Evening Star. Thus, living on through such a length of years, the shepherd, if he loved himself, must needs have loved his helpmate. But to Michael's heart this son of his old age was yet more dear. Effect which might perhaps have been produced by that instinctive tenderness, the same blind spirit which is in the blood of all, or that a child, more than all other gifts, brings hope with it and forward-looking thoughts, and stirrings of inquietude when they, by tendency of nature, needs must fail. From such and other causes, to the thoughts of the old man, his only son was now the dearest object that he knew on earth. Exceeding was the love he bare to him, his heart and his heart's joy. For oftentimes old Michael, while he was a babe in arms, had done him female service, not alone for dalliance and delight, as is the use of fathers, but with patient mind enforced to acts of tenderness. and he had rocked his cradle with a woman's gentle hand. And in a later time, ere yet the boy had put on boy's attire, did Michael love, albeit of a stern, unbending mind, to have the young one in his sight when he had work by his own door, or when he sat with sheep before him on his shepherd's stool, beneath that large old oak which near their door stood, and from its enormous breadth of shade, chosen for the shearer's covert from the sun, thence in our rustic dialect we called the clipping tree, a name which yet it bears. Footnote: Clipping is the word used in the north of England for shearing. There, while they two were sitting in the shade, with others round them, earnest all and blithe, would Michael exercise his heart with looks of fond correction and reproof bestowed upon the child if he disturbed the sheep by catching at their legs, or with his shouts scare them while they lay still beneath the shears. And when by heaven's good grace the boy grew up a healthy lad, and carried in his cheek 2 steady roses that were 5 years old, then Michael from a winter coppice cut with his own hand a sapling, which he hooped with iron, making it throughout in all due requisites a perfect shepherd's staff, and gave it to the boy, wherewith equipped, he as a watchman oftentimes was placed at gate or gap to stem or turn the flock, and to his office prematurely called, there stood the urchin, as you will divine, something between a hindrance and a help, and for this cause not always, I believe, receiving from his father hire of praise. While this good household thus were living on from day to day, to Michael's ear there came distressful tidings. Long before the time of which I speak, the shepherd had been bound in surety for his brother's son, a man of industrious life and ample means, but unforeseen misfortunes suddenly had pressed upon him, and old Michael now was summoned to discharge the forfeiture, a grievous penalty, but little less than half his substance. This unlooked-for claim at the first hearing for a moment took more hope out of his life than he supposed that any old man ever could have lost. As soon as he had gathered so much strength that he could look his trouble in the face, it seemed that his sole refuge was to sell a portion of his patrimonial fields. Such was his first resolve. He thought again, and his heart failed him. "Isabel," said he, 2 evenings after he had heard the news, "I have been toiling more than 70 years, and in the open sunshine of God's love have we all lived. Yet if these fields of ours should pass into a stranger's hand, I think that I could not lie quiet in my grave. Our lot is a hard lot. The sun itself has scarcely been more diligent than I, and I have lived to be a fool at last to my own family. An evil man that was, and made an evil choice, if he were false to us. And if he were not false, there are 10,000 to whom loss like this had been no sorrow. I forgive him. But 'twere better to be dumb than to talk thus. When I began, my purpose was to speak of remedies and of a cheerful hope. Our Luke shall leave us, Isabel. The land shall not go from us, and it shall be free. He shall possess it, free as is the wind that passes over it. We have, thou knowest, another kinsman. He will be our friend in this distress. He is a prosperous man, thriving in trade, and Luke to him shall go, and with his kinsman's help and his own thrift, he quickly will repair this loss, and then may come again to us. If here he stay, what can be done? Where every one is poor, what can be gained?" At this the old man paused, and Isabel sat silent, for her mind was busy looking back into past times. "There's Richard Bateman," thought she to herself. "He was a parish boy. At the church door they made a gathering for him, shillings, pence, and halfpennies, wherewith the neighbours bought a basket, which they filled with pedlars' wares, and with this basket on his arm the lad went up to London, found a master there, who out of many chose the trusty boy to go and overlook his merchandise beyond the seas, where he grew wondrous rich, and left estates and moneys to the poor, and at his birthplace built a chapel floored with marble, which he sent from foreign lands. These thoughts and many others of like sort passed quickly through the mind of Isabel, and her face brightened. The old man was glad, and thus resumed. "Well, Isabel, this scheme these 2 days has been meat and drink to me. Far more than we have lost is left us yet. We have enough. I wish indeed that I were younger, but this hope is a good hope. Make ready Luke's best garments, of the best buy for him more, and let us send him forth to-morrow, or the next day, or to-night. If he could go, the boy should go to-night." Here Michael ceased, and to the fields went forth with a light heart. The housewife for 5 days was restless morn and night, and all day long wrought on with her best fingers to prepare things needful for the journey of her son. But Isabel was glad when Sunday came to stop her in her work, for when she lay by Michael's side, she for the 2 last nights heard him, how he was troubled in his sleep. And when they rose at morning she could see that all his hopes were gone. That day at noon she said to Luke, while they two by themselves were sitting at the door, "Thou must not go. We have no other child but thee to lose, none to remember. Do not go away, for if thou leave thy father he will die." The lad made answer with a jocund voice, and Isabel, when she had told her fears, recovered heart. That evening her best fare did she bring forth, and all together sat like happy people round a Christmas fire. Next morning Isabel resumed her work, and all the ensuing week the house appeared as cheerful as a grove in spring. At length the expected letter from their kinsman came, with kind assurances that he would do his utmost for the welfare of the boy, to which requests were added that forthwith he might be sent to him. 10 times or more the letter was read over. Isabel went forth to show it to the neighbors round, nor was there at that time on English land a prouder heart than Luke's. When Isabel had to her house returned, the old man said, "He shall depart to-morrow." To this word the housewife answered, talking much of things which, if at such short notice he should go, would surely be forgotten. But at length she gave consent, and Michael was at ease. Near the tumultuous brook of Greenhead Gill, in that deep valley, Michael had designed to build a sheepfold, and before he heard the tidings of his melancholy loss, for this same purpose he had gathered up a heap of stones, which close to the brookside lay thrown together, ready for the work. With Luke that evening thitherward he walked, and soon as they had reached the place he stopped, and thus the old man spake to him: "My son, to-morrow thou wilt leave me. With full heart I look upon thee, for thou art the same that wert a promise to me ere thy birth, and all thy life hast been my daily joy. I will relate to thee some little part of our 2 histories. 'Twill do thee good when thou art from me, even if I should speak of things thou canst not know of. After thou first camest into the world, as it befalls to new-born infants, thou didst sleep away 2 days, and blessings from thy father's tongue then fell upon thee. Day by day passed on, and still I loved thee with increasing love. Never to living ear came sweeter sounds than when I heard thee by our own fireside, first uttering without words a natural tune when thou, a feeding babe, didst in thy joy sing at thy mother's breast. Month followed month, and in the open fields my life was passed, and in the mountains, else I think that thou hadst been brought up upon thy father's knees. But we were playmates, Luke. Among these hills, as well thou knowest, in us the old and young have played together, nor with me didst thou lack any pleasure which a boy can know." Luke had a manly heart, but at these words he sobbed aloud. The old man grasped his hand, and said, "Nay, do not take it so. I see that these are things of which I need not speak. Even to the utmost I have been to thee a kind and a good father, and herein I but repay a gift which I myself received at others' hands. For though now old beyond the common life of man, I still remember them who loved me in my youth. Both of them sleep together. Here they lived as all their forefathers had done, and when at length their time was come, they were not loath to give their bodies to the family mould. I wished that thou shouldst live the life they lived. But 'tis a long time to look back, my son, and see so little gain from 60 years. These fields were burthened when they came to me. Till I was 40 years of age, not more than half of my inheritance was mine. I toiled and toiled. God blessed me in my work, and till these 3 weeks past the land was free. It looks as if it never could endure another master. Heaven forgive me, Luke, if I judge ill for thee, but it seems good that thou shouldst go." At this the old man paused, then, pointing to the stones near which they stood, thus, after a short silence, he resumed: "This was a work for us, and now, my son, it is a work for me. But lay one stone. Here, lay it for me, Luke, with thine own hands. I for the purpose brought thee to this place." "Nay, boy, be of good hope. We both may live to see a better day. At 84 I still am strong and stout. Do thou thy part, I will do mine. I will begin again with many tasks that were resigned to thee. Up to the heights, and in among the storms will I without thee go again, and do all works which I was wont to do alone before I knew thy face. Heaven bless thee, boy. Thy heart these 2 weeks has been beating fast with many hopes. It should be so. Yes, yes. I knew that thou couldst never have a wish to leave me, Luke. Thou hast been bound to me only by links of love. When thou art gone, what will be left to us? But I forget my purposes. Lay now the corner-stone as I requested, and hereafter, Luke, when thou art gone away, should evil men be thy companions, let this sheepfold be thy anchor and thy shield. Amid all fear and all temptation, let it be to thee an emblem of the life thy fathers lived, who, being innocent, did for that cause bestir them to good deeds. Now fare thee well. When thou returnest, thou in this place wilt see a work which is not here, a covenant. 'Twill be between us. But whatever fate befall thee, I shall love thee to the last, and bear thy memory with me to the grave." The shepherd ended here, and Luke stooped down, and, as his father had requested, laid the first stone of the sheepfold. At the sight, the old man's grief broke from him. To his heart he pressed his son, he kissed him and wept, and to the house together they returned. Next morning, as had been resolved, the boy began his journey, and when he had reached the public way, he put on a bold face, and all the neighbors, as he passed their doors, came forth with wishes and with farewell prayers that followed him till he was out of sight. A good report did from their kinsmen come of Luke and his well-doing, and the boy wrote loving letters, full of wondrous news, which, as the housewife phrased it, were throughout the prettiest letters that were ever seen. Both parents read them with rejoicing hearts. So many months passed on, and once again the shepherd went about his daily work with confident and cheerful thoughts, and now sometimes when he could find a leisure hour, he to that valley took his way, and there wrought at the sheepfold. Meantime Luke began to slacken in his duty, and at length he in the dissolute city gave himself to evil courses. Ignominy and shame fell upon him, so that he was driven at last to seek a hiding-place beyond the seas. There is a comfort in the strength of love. 'Twill make a thing endurable which else would break the heart. Old Michael found it so. I have conversed with more than one who well remembered the old man, and what he was years after he had heard this heavy news. His bodily frame had been from youth to age of an unusual strength. Among the rocks he went, and still looked up upon the sun, and listened to the wind, and as before performed all kinds of labor for his sheep, and for the land, his small inheritance. And to that hollow dell from time to time did he repair, to build the fold of which his flock had need. 'Tis not forgotten yet the pity which was then in every heart for the old man, and 'tis believed by all that many and many a day he thither went, and never lifted up a single stone. There by the sheepfold sometimes was he seen sitting alone, with that his faithful dog, then old, beside him, lying at his feet. The length of full 7 years from time to time he at the building of the sheepfold wrought, and left the work unfinished when he died. 3 years or little more did Isabel survive her husband. At her death the estate was sold and went into a stranger's hand. The cottage, which was named the Evening Star, is gone. The ploughshare has been through the ground on which it stood. Great changes have been wrought in all the neighborhood. Yet the oak is left that grew beside their door, and the remains of the unfinished sheepfold may be seen beside the boisterous brook of Greenhead Gill. End of Michael, a Pastoral Poem, by William Wordsworth.
Memoirs of a Madman, by Nikolai Gogol. Translated from the Russian by Claud Field. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Reyto. Memoirs of a Madman, by Nikolai Gogol. Translated from the Russian by Claud Field. October 3rd. A strange occurrence has taken place today. I got up fairly late, and when Mara brought me my clean boots, I asked her how late it was. When I heard it had long struck 10, I dressed as quickly as possible. To tell the truth, I would rather not have gone to the office at all today, for I know beforehand that our department chief will look as sour as vinegar. For some time past he's been in the habit of saying to me, "Look here, my friend, there's something wrong with your head. You often rush about as though you were possessed. Then you make such confused abstracts out of the documents that the devil himself cannot make them out. You write the title without any capital letters, and add neither the date nor the docket number. The long-legged scoundrel! He's certainly envious of me, because I sit in the director's workroom and mend His Excellency's pens. In a word, I should not have gone to the office if I'd not hoped to meet the accountant and perhaps squeeze a little advance out of this skinflint. A terrible man, this accountant. As for his advancing one's salary once in a way, you might sooner expect the skies to fall. You may beg and beseech him, and be on the very verge of ruin. This grey devil won't budge an inch. At the same time, his own cook at home, as all the world knows, boxes his ears. I really don't see what good one gets by serving in our department. There are no plums there. In the fiscal and judicial offices it's quite different. There some ungainly fellow sits in a corner and writes. He has such a shabby coat and such an ugly mug that one would like to spit on both of them. But you should see what a splendid country house he has rented. He would not condescend to accept a gilt porcelain cup as a present. "You can give that to your family doctor," he would say. Nothing less than a pair of chestnut horses, a fine carriage, or a beaver fur coat worth 300 roubles would be good enough for him. And yet he seems so mild and quiet, and asks so amiably, "Please lend me your penknife. I wish to mend my pen." Nevertheless, he knows how to scarify a petitioner till he has hardly a whole stitch left on his body. In our office, it must be admitted, everything is done in a proper and gentlemanly way. There's more cleanliness and elegance than one will ever find in government offices. The tables are mahogany, and everyone is addressed as Sir. And truly, were it not for this official propriety, I should long ago have sent in my resignation. I put on my old cloak and took my umbrella, as a light rain was falling. No one was to be seen on the streets except some women who had flung their skirts over their heads. Here and there one saw a cabman or a shopman with his umbrella up. Of the higher classes, one only saw an official here and there. One I saw at the street crossing, and thought to myself, "Ah, my friend, you're not going to the office, but after that young lady who walks in front of you. You're just like the officers who run after every petticoat they see." As I was thus following the train of my thoughts, I saw a carriage stop before a shop just as I was passing it. I recognized it at once. It was our director's carriage. He has nothing to do in the shop, I said to myself. It must be his daughter. I pressed myself close against the wall. A lackey opened the carriage door, and, as I had expected, she fluttered like a bird out of it. How proudly she looked right and left! How she drew her eyebrows together and shot lightnings from her eyes! Good heavens! I am lost, hopelessly lost. But why must she come out in such abominable weather? And yet they say women are so mad on their finery. She didn't recognize me. I had wrapped myself as closely as possible in my cloak. It was dirty and old-fashioned, and I would not have liked to have been seen by her wearing it. Now they wear cloaks with long collars, but mine has only a short double collar, and the cloth is of inferior quality. Her little dog could not get into the shop, and remained outside. I know this dog. Its name is Maggie. Before I'd been standing there a minute, I heard a voice call, "Good day, Maggie." Who the deuce was that? I looked around and saw two ladies hurrying by under an umbrella, one old, the other fairly young. They had already passed me when I heard the same voice say again, "For shame, Maggie." What was that? I saw Maggie sniffing at a dog which ran behind the ladies. The deuce, I thought to myself. I'm not drunk. That happens pretty seldom. "No, Fidel, you are wrong," I heard Maggie say quite distinctly. I was ruff, ruff. I was ruff, 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 very ill. What an extraordinary dog! I was, to tell the truth, quite amazed to hear it talk human language. But when I considered the matter well, I ceased to be astonished. In fact, such things have already happened in the world. It is said that in England a fish put its head out of water, and said a word or two in such an extraordinary language that learned men have been puzzling over them for 3 years, and have not succeeded in interpreting them yet. I also read in the paper of 2 cows who entered a shop and asked for a pound of tea. Meanwhile, what Maggie went on to say seemed to me still more remarkable. She added, "I wrote to you lately, Fidel. Perhaps Polkan did not bring you the letter." Now, I'm willing to forfeit a whole month's salary if I ever heard of dogs writing before. This has certainly astonished me. For some little time past I hear and see things which no other man has heard and seen. I will, I thought, follow that dog in order to get to the bottom of the matter. Accordingly, I opened my umbrella and went after the 2 ladies. They went down Bean Street, turned through Citizen Street and Carpenter Street, and finally halted on the Cuckoo Bridge before a large house. I know this house. It is Sverkoff's. What a monster he is! What sort of people live there? How many cooks? How many bagmen? There are brother officials of mine also. They're packed on each other like herrings, and I have a friend there, a fine player on the cornet. The ladies mounted to the 5th story. Very good, thought I. I will make a note of the number in order to follow up the matter at the first opportunity. October 4th. Today is Wednesday, and I was, as usual, in the office. I came early on purpose, sat down, and mended all the pens. Our director must be a very clever man. The whole room is full of bookcases. I read the titles of some of the books. They were very learned, beyond the comprehension of people of my class, and all in French and German. I look at his face, see how much dignity there is in his eyes. I never hear a single superfluous word from his mouth, except that when he hands over the documents, he asks, "What sort of weather is it?" No, he is not a man of our class. He is a real statesman. I have already noticed that I am a special favourite of his. If now his daughter also, what folly! Let me say no more about it. I have read the Northern Bee. What foolish people the French are! By heavens, I should like to tackle them all and give them a thrashing. I have also read a fine description of a ball given by a landowner of Kursk. The landowners of Kursk write a fine style. Then I noticed that it was already 12:30, and the director had not yet left his bedroom. But about 1:30 something happened which no pen can describe. The door opened. I thought it was the director. I jumped up with my documents from the seat, and then she herself came into the room. Ye saints, how beautifully she was dressed! Her garments were whiter than a swan's plumage. Oh, how splendid! A sun, indeed, a real sun. She greeted me and asked, "Has not my father come yet?" Oh, what a voice! A canary bird! A real canary bird! "Your Excellency," I wanted to exclaim, "don't have me executed, but if it must be done, then kill me rather with your own angelic hand." But God knows why I could not bring it out, so I only said, "No, he has not come yet." She glanced at me, looked at the books, and let her handkerchief fall. Instantly I started up, but slipped on the infernal polished floor and nearly broke my nose. Still I succeeded in picking up the handkerchief. Ye heavenly choirs, what a handkerchief! So tender and soft, of the finest cambric. It had the scent of a general's rank. She thanked me, and smiled so amiably that her sugar lips nearly melted. Then she left the room. After I'd sat there about an hour, a flunkey came in and said, "You can go home, Mr. Ivanovitch. The director has already gone out." I cannot stand these lackeys. They hang about the vestibules and scarcely vouchsafe to greet one with a nod. Yes, sometimes it is even worse. Once one of these rascals offered me a snuff-box without even getting up from his chair. "Don't you know, then, you country bumpkin, that I'm an official and of aristocratic birth?" This time, however, I took my hat and overcoat quietly. These people naturally never think of helping one on with it. I went home, lay a good while on the bed, and wrote some verses in my note. "'Tis an hour since I saw thee, and it seems a whole long year. If I loathe my own existence, how can I live on, my dear?" I think they're by Pushkin. In the evening I wrapped myself in my cloak, hastened to the director's house, and waited there a long time to see if she would come out and get into the carriage. I only wanted to see her once, but she did not come. November 6th. Our chief clerk has gone mad. When I came to the office today, he called me to his room and began as follows. "Look here, my friend, what wild ideas have got into your head?" "How? What? None at all," I answered. "Consider well. You are already past 40. It is quite time to be reasonable. What do you imagine? Do you think I don't know all your tricks? Are you trying to pay court to the director's daughter? Look at yourself and realize what you are, a nonentity, nothing else. I would not give a kopeck for you. Look well in the glass. How can you have such thoughts with such a caricature of a face? May the devil take him! Because his own face has a certain resemblance to a medicine bottle, because he has a curly bush of hair on his head, and sometimes combs it upwards, and sometimes plasters it down in all kinds of queer ways, he thinks that he can do everything. I know well. I know why he's angry with me. He is envious. Perhaps he's noticed the tokens of favor which have been graciously shown me. But why should I bother about him? A counselor. What sort of important animal is that? He wears a gold chain with his watch, buys himself boots at 30 rubles a pair. May the deuce take him. Am I a tailor's son or some other obscure cabbage? I am a nobleman. I can also work my way up. I'm just 42, an age when a man's real career generally begins. Wait a bit, my friend. I too may get to a superior's rank, or perhaps, if God is gracious, even to a higher one. I shall make a name which will far outstrip yours. You think there are no able men except yourself? I only need to order a fashionable coat and wear a tie like yours, and you would be quite eclipsed. But I have no money. That is the worst part of it. November 8th. I was at the theatre. The Russian House Fool was performed. I laughed heartily. There was also a kind of musical comedy which contained amusing hits at barristers. The language was very broad. I wonder the censor passed it. In the comedy, lines occur which accuse the merchants of cheating. Their sons are set to lead immoral lives and to behave very disrespectfully toward the nobility. The critics also are criticized. They are said only to be able to find fault, so that authors have to beg the public for protection. Our modern dramatists certainly write amusing things. I'm very fond of the theatre. If I have only a kopeck in my pocket, I always go there. Most of my fellow officials are uneducated boors, and they never enter a theatre unless one throws free tickets at their head. One actress sang divinely. I thought also of... but silence. November 9th. About 8 o'clock, I went to the office. The chief clerk pretended not to notice my arrival. I, for my part, also behaved as though he were not in existence. I read through and collated documents. About 4 o'clock, I left. I passed by the director's house, but no one was to be seen. After dinner, I lay for a good while on the bed. November 11th. Today I sat in the director's room, mended 23 pens for him and for her excellence, his daughter, 4 more. The director likes to see many pens lying on his table. What a head he must have! He continually wraps himself in silence, but I don't think the smallest trifle escapes his eye. I should like to know what he's generally thinking of, what is really going on in this brain. I should like to get acquainted with the whole manner of life of these gentlemen, and get a closer view of their cunning courtiers' arts, and all the activities of these circles. I have often thought of asking His Excellence about them. But the deuce knows why. Every time my tongue failed me, and I could get nothing out but my meteorological report. I wish I could get a look into the spare room whose door I so often see open. And a second small room behind the spare room excites my curiosity. How splendidly it's fitted up! What a quantity of mirrors and choice china it contains! I should also like to cast a glance into those regions where Her Excellency, the daughter, wields the sceptre. I should like to see how all the scent bottles and boxes are arranged in her boudoir, and the flowers which exhale so delicious a scent that one is half afraid to breathe, and her clothes lying about, which are too ethereal to be called clothes, but silence. Today there came to me what seemed to be a heavenly inspiration. I remembered the conversation between the two dogs which I had overheard on Nevsky Prospect. Very good, I thought. Now I see my way clear. I must get hold of the correspondence which these two silly dogs have carried on with each other. In it I shall probably find many things explained. I had already once called Meggie to me and said to her, "Listen, Meggie, now we're alone together. If you like, I will also shut the door so that no one can see us. Tell me now all that you know about your mistress. I swear to you that I will tell no one." But the cunning dog drew in its tail, ruffled up its hair, and went quite quietly out of the door, as though it had heard nothing. I'd long been of the opinion that dogs are much cleverer than men. I also believed that they could talk, and that only a certain obstinacy kept them from doing so. They are especially watchful animals, and nothing escapes their observation. Now, cost what it may, I will go tomorrow to Sverkov's house in order to ask after Fidel, and if I have luck, to get hold of all the letters which Meggie has written to her. November 12th. Today, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I started, in order, by some means or other, to see Fidel and question her. I cannot stand this smell of sauerkraut which assails one's olfactory nerves from all the shops in Citizen Street. There also exhales such an odour from under each house door that one must hold one's nose and pass by quickly. There ascends also so much smoke and soot from the artisan shops that it's almost impossible to get through it. When I'd climbed up to the 6th story and had rung the bell, a rather pretty girl with a freckled face came out. I recognized her as the companion of the old lady. She blushed a little and said, "What do you want?" "I want to have a little conversation with your dog." She was a simple-minded girl, as I saw at once. The dog came running and barking loudly. I wanted to take hold of it, but the abominable beast nearly caught hold of my nose with its teeth. But in a corner of the room I saw its sleeping basket. Ah, that was what I wanted. I went to it, rummaged in the straw, and to my great satisfaction drew out a little packet of small pieces of paper. When the hideous little dog saw this, it first bit me in the calf of the leg, and then, as soon as it had become aware of my theft, it began to whimper and to fawn on me. But I said, "No, you're a little beast. Good-bye," and hastened away. I believe the girl thought me mad. At any rate, she was thoroughly alarmed. When I reached my room, I wished to get to work at once and read through the letters by daylight, since I do not see well by candlelight. But the wretched Mara had got the idea of sweeping the floor. These blockheads of Finnish women are always clean where there's no need to be. I then went for a little walk and began to think over what had happened. Now at last I could get to the bottom of all the facts, ideas, and motives. These letters would explain everything. Dogs are clever fellows. They know all about politics, and I will certainly find in the letters all I want, especially the character of the director and all his relationships. And through these letters I will get information about her who... But silence. Towards evening I came home and lay for a good while on the bed. November 13th. Now let us see. The letter is fairly legible, but the handwriting is somewhat doggish. Dear Fidel, I cannot get accustomed to your ordinary name, as if they could not have found a better one for you. Fidel, how tasteless, how ordinary. But this is not the time to discuss it. I am very glad that we thought of corresponding with each other. The letter is quite correctly written. The punctuation and spelling are perfectly right. Even our head clerk does not write so simply and clearly, though he declares he's been at the university. Let us go on. I think that it is one of the most refined joys of this world to interchange thoughts, feelings, and impressions. This idea comes from some book which has been translated from German. I can't remember the title. I speak from experience, although I have not gone farther into the world than just before our front door. Does not my life pass happily and comfortably? My mistress, whom her father called Sophie, is quite in love with me. But better be silent. Her father also often strokes me. I drink tea and coffee with cream. Yes, my dear, I must confess to you that I find no satisfaction in those large gnawed-at bones which Polkan devours in the kitchen. Only the bones of wild fowl are good, and that only when the marrow has not been sucked out of them. They taste very nice with a little sauce, but there should be no green stuff in it. But I know nothing worse than the habit of giving dogs balls of bread kneaded up. Someone sits at table, kneads a bread ball with dirty fingers, calls you, and sticks it in your mouth. Good manners forbid your refusing it, so you eat it. With disgust, it is true, but you eat it. The deuce, what is this? What rubbish! As if she could find nothing more suitable to write about. I'll see if there's anything more reasonable on the second page. I am quite willing to inform you of everything that goes on here. I've already mentioned the most important person in the house, whom Sophie calls Papa. He's a very strange man. Ah, here we are at last. Yes, I knew it. They have a politician's penetrating eye for all things. Let us see what she says about Papa. A strange man. Generally he is silent. He only speaks seldom, but about a week ago he kept on repeating to himself, "Shall I get it or not?" In one hand he took a sheet of paper, the other he stretched out as though to receive something, and repeated, "Shall I get it or not?" Once he turned to me with the question, "What do you think, Meggie?" I did not understand in the least what he meant, sniffed at his boots, and went away. A week later he came home with his face beaming. That morning he was visited by several officers in uniform who congratulated him. At the dinner table he was in a better humour than I've ever seen him before. Ah, he's ambitious then. I must make a note of that. Pardon, my dear, I hasten to conclude, etc., etc. Tomorrow I will finish the letter. Now, good morning. Here I am again at your service. Today, my mistress, Sophie— Oh, we'll see what she says about Sophie. Let us go on. Was in an unusually excited state. She went to a ball, and I was glad that I could write to you in her absence. She likes going to balls, although she gets dreadfully irritated while dressing. I cannot understand, my dear, what is the pleasure in going to a ball. She comes home from the ball at 6 o'clock in the early morning, and to judge by her pale and emaciated face, she's had nothing to eat. I could, frankly speaking, not endure such an existence. If I could not get partridge with sauce, or the wing of a roast chicken, I don't know what I should do. Porridge with sauce is also tolerable, but I can get up no enthusiasm for carrots, turnips, and artichokes. The style is very unequal. One sees at once that it has not been written by a man. The beginning is quite intelligent, but at the end the canine nature breaks out. I will read another letter. It's rather long, and there's no date. Ah, my dear, how delightful is the arrival of spring! My heart beats as though it expected something. There is a perpetual ringing in my ears, so that I often stand with my foot raised for several minutes at a time, and listen towards the door. In confidence, I'll tell you that I have many admirers. I often sit on the window-sill and let them pass in review. Ah, if you knew what miscreations there are among them! One, a clumsy house-dog with stupidity written on his face, walks on the street with an important air, and imagines that he's an extremely important person, and that the eyes of all the world are fastened on him. I don't pay him the least attention, and pretend not to see him at all. And what a hideous bulldog has taken up his post opposite my window! If he stood on his hind legs, as the monster probably cannot, he would be taller by a head than my mistress's papa, who himself has a stately figure. This lout seems, moreover, to be very impudent. I growl at him, but he does not seem to mind that at all. If he at least would only wrinkle his forehead. Instead of that, he stretches out his tongue, droops his big ears, and stares in at the window. This rustic boor! But do you think, my dear, that my heart remains proof against all temptations? Alas, no. If you had only seen that gentlemanly dog who crept through the fence of the neighbouring house. Treasure is his name. Oh, my dear, what a delightful snout he has. To the deuce with this stuff! What rubbish it is! How can one blacken paper with such absurdities? Give me a man. I want to see a man. I need some food to nourish and refresh my mind, and get the silliness instead. I will turn the page to see if there's anything better on the other side. Sophie sat at the table and sewed something. I looked out of the window and amused myself by watching the passers-by. Suddenly a flunkey entered and announced a visitor, Mr. Teploff. "Show him in," said Sophie, and began to embrace me. "Ah, Meggie, do you know who that is? He's dark and belongs to the royal household. And what eyes he has, dark and brilliant as fire." Sophie hastened into her room. A minute later, a young gentleman with black whiskers entered. He went to the mirror, smoothed his hair, and looked around the room. I turned away and sat down in my place. Sophie entered and returned his bow in a friendly manner. I pretended to observe nothing and continued to look out of the window, but I leant my head a little on one side to hear what they were talking about. Oh, my dear, what silly things they discussed! How a lady executed the wrong figure in dancing, how a certain Boboff with his expensive shirt frill had looked like a stork and nearly fallen down, how a certain Ladina imagined she had blue eyes when they were really green, etc. I do not know, my dear, what special charm she finds in her Mr. Teploff, and why she is so delighted with him. It seems to me, myself, that there is something wrong here. It is impossible that this Teploff should bewitch her. We will see further. If this gentleman of the household pleases her, then she must also be pleased, according to my view, with that official who sits in her papa's waiting-room. Oh, my dear, if you knew what a figure he is, a regular tortoise. What official does she mean? He has an extraordinary name. He always sits there and mends the pens. His hair looks like a truss of hay. Her papa always employs him instead of a servant. I believe this abominable little beast is referring to me. But what has my hair got to do with hay? Sophie can never keep from laughing when she sees him. "You lie, cursed dog! What a scandalous tongue! As if I did not know that it's envy which prompts you, and that there is treachery at work. Yes, the treachery of the chief clerk. This man hates me implacably. He has plotted against me. He is always seeking to injure me. I'll look through one more letter. Perhaps it will make the matter clearer. Fidel, my dear, pardon me that I have not written for so long. I was floating in a dream of delight. In truth, some author remarks, love is a second life. Besides, great changes are going on in the house. The young chamberlain is always here. Sophie is wildly in love with him. Her papa is quite contented. I heard from Gregor, who sweeps the floor, and is in the habit of talking to himself, that the marriage will soon be celebrated. Her papa will, at any rate, get his daughter married to a general, a colonel, or a chamberlain. Deuce take it, I can read no more. It is all about chamberlains and generals. I should like myself to be a general. Not in order to sue for her hand and all that. No, not at all. I should like to be a general merely in order to see people wriggling, squirming, and hatching plots before me. And then I should like to tell them that they're both of them not worth spitting on. but it is vexatious. I tear the foolish dog's letters up in 1,000 pieces. December 3rd. It is not possible that the marriage should take place. It is only idle gossip. What does it signify if he is a chamberlain? That is only a dignity, not a substantial thing which one can see or handle. His chamberlain's office will not procure him a third eye in his forehead. Neither is his nose made of gold. It's just like mine or anyone else's nose. He does not eat and cough, but smells and sneezes with it. I should like to get to the bottom of the mystery. Whence do all these distinctions come? Why am I only a titular councillor? Perhaps I'm really a count or a general, and only appear to be a titular councillor. Perhaps I don't even know who and what I am. How many cases there are in history of a simple gentleman, or even a burgher or peasant, suddenly turning out to be a great lord or baron. Well, suppose that I appear suddenly in a general's uniform, on the right shoulder an epaulette, on the left an epaulette, and a blue sash across my breast. What sort of a tune would my beloved sing then? What would her papa, our director, say? Oh, he is ambitious. He's a Freemason, certainly a Freemason, however much he may conceal it. I have found it out. When he gives anyone his hand, he only reaches out 2 fingers. Well, could I not this minute be nominated a general or superintendent? I should like to know why I am a titular councillor. Why just that and nothing more? December 5th. Today I've been reading papers the whole morning. Very strange things are happening in Spain. I have not understood them all. It is said that the throne is vacant. The representatives of the people are in difficulties about finding an occupant, and riots are taking place. All this appears to me very strange. How can the throne be vacant? It is said that it will be occupied by a woman. A woman cannot sit on a throne. That is impossible. Only a king can sit on a throne. They say that there's no king there, but that is not possible. There cannot be a kingdom without a king. There must be a king, but he's hidden away somewhere. Perhaps he's actually on the spot, and only some domestic complications or fears of the neighboring powers, France and other countries, compel him to remain in concealment. There might also be other reasons. December 8th. I was nearly going to the office, but various considerations kept me from doing so. I keep on thinking about these Spanish affairs. How is it possible that a woman should reign? It would not be allowed, especially by England. In the rest of Europe, the political situation is also critical. The Emperor of Austria. These events, to tell the truth, have so shaken and shattered me that I could really do nothing all day. Mara told me that I was very absent-minded at table. In fact, in my absent-mindedness, I threw 2 plates on the ground so that they broke in pieces. After dinner, I felt weak and did not feel up to making abstracts of reports. I lay most of the time on my bed and thought of the Spanish affairs. The year 2000, April 43rd. Today is a day of splendid triumph. Spain has a king. He's been found. And I am he. I discovered it today. All of a sudden it came upon me like a flash of lightning. I don't understand how I could imagine that I'm a titular councillor. How could such a foolish idea enter my head? It was fortunate that it occurred to no one to shut me up in an asylum. Now it is all clear, and as plain as a pikestaff. Formerly, I don't know why, everything seemed veil and a kind of mist. That is, I believe, because people think that the human brain is in the head. Nothing of the sort. It is carried by the wind from the Caspian Sea. For the first time I told Mara who I am. When she learned that the King of Spain stood before her, she struck her hands together over her head and nearly died of alarm. The stupid thing had never seen the King of Spain before. I comforted her, however, at once by assuring her that I was not angry with her for having hitherto cleaned my boots badly. Women are stupid things. One cannot interest them in lofty subjects. She was frightened because she thought all kings of Spain were like Philip II. But I explained to her that there was a great difference between me and him. I did not go to the office. Why the deuce should I? No, my dear friends, you won't get me there again. I'm not going to worry myself with your infernal documents any more. Marchember 86. Between day and night. Today the office messenger came and summoned me, as I had not been there for 3 weeks. I went just for the fun of the thing. The chief clerk thought I would bow humbly before him and make excuses. But I looked at him quite indifferently, neither angrily nor mildly, and sat down quietly at my place as though I noticed no one. I looked at all this rabble of scribblers and thought, if you only knew who is sitting among you. Good heavens, what a to-do you would make. Even the chief clerk would bow himself to the earth before me, as he does now before the director. A pile of reports was laid before me, of which to make abstracts, but I didn't touch them with one finger. After a little time there was a commotion in the office, and there a report went round that the director was coming. Many of the clerks vied with each other to attract his notice, but I did not stir. As he came through our room, each one hastily buttoned up his coat, but I had no idea of doing anything of the sort. What is the director to me? Should I stand up before him? Never. What sort of a director is he? He's a bottle stopper and no director, a quite ordinary simple bottle stopper, nothing more. I felt quite amused as they gave me a document to sign. They thought I would simply put down my name, so-and-so clerk. Why not? But at the top of the sheet, where the director generally writes his name, I inscribed Ferdinand the Eighth in bold characters. You should have seen what a reverential silence ensued. But I made a gesture with my hand and said, "Gentlemen, no ceremony, please." Then I went out and took my way straight to the director's house. He was not at home. The flunkey wanted not to let me in, but I talked to him in such a way that he soon dropped his arms. I went straight to Sophie's dressing room. She sat before the mirror. When she saw me, she sprang up and took a step backwards, but I did not tell her that I was the King of Spain. But I did tell her that a happiness awaited her, beyond her power to imagine, and that in spite of all our enemies' devices we should be united. That was all which I wished to say to her, and I went out. Oh, what cunning creatures these women are! Now I found out what woman really is. Hitherto no one knew whom a woman really loves. I am the first to discover it. She loves the devil. Yes, joking apart, learned men write nonsense when they pronounce that she is this and that. She loves the devil, that is all. You see a woman looking through her lorgnette from a box in the front row. One thinks she is watching that stout gentleman who wears an order. Not a bit of it. She's watching the devil who stands behind his back. He's hidden himself there and beckons to her with his finger, and she marries him. Actually, she marries him. That is all ambition, and the reason is that there is under the tongue a little blister in which there is a little worm the size of a pin's head, and this is constructed by a barber in Bean Street. I don't remember his name at the moment, but so much is certain that, in conjunction with a midwife, he wants to spread Mohammedanism all over the world, and that in consequence of this a large number of people in France have already adopted the faith of Islam. No date. The day had no date. I went for a walk incognito on the Nevsky Prospect. I avoided every appearance of being the King of Spain. I felt it below my dignity to let myself be recognized by the whole world, since I must first present myself at court. And I was also restrained by the fact that I have at present no Spanish national costume. If I could only get a cloak. I tried to have a consultation with a tailor, but these people are real asses. Moreover, they neglect their business, dabble in speculation, and have become loafers. I'll have a cloak made out of my new official uniform, which I've only worn twice. But to prevent this botcher of a tailor spoiling it, I will make it myself with closed doors, so that no one sees me. Since the cut must be altogether altered, I have used the scissors myself. I don't remember the date, and the devil knows what month it was. The cloak is quite ready. Mara exclaimed aloud when I put it on. I will, however, not present myself at court yet. The Spanish deputation has not yet arrived. It would not be befitting if I appeared without them. My appearance would be less imposing. From hour to hour, I expect them. The first. The extraordinary long delay of the deputies in coming astonishes me. What can possibly keep them? Perhaps France has a hand in the matter. It is certainly hostilely inclined. I went to the post office to inquire whether the Spanish deputation had come. The postmaster is an extraordinary blockhead who knows nothing. No, he said to me, there's no Spanish deputation here, but if you want to send them a letter, we will forward it at the fixed rate. The deuce! What do I want with a letter? Letters are nonsense. Letters are written by apothecaries. Madrid, February 30th. So, I am in Spain after all. It has happened so quickly that I could hardly take it in. The Spanish deputies came early this morning, and I got with them into the carriage. This unexpected promptness seemed to me strange. We drove so quickly that in half an hour we were at the Spanish frontier. Over all Europe now there are cast-iron roads, and the steamers go very fast. A wonderful country, this Spain. As we entered the first room, I saw numerous persons with shorn heads. I guessed at once that they must be either grandees or soldiers, at least to judge by their shorn heads. The Chancellor of the State, who led me by the hand, seemed to me to behave in a very strange way. He pushed me into a little room and said, "Stay here, and if you call yourself King Ferdinand again, I will drive the wish to do so out of you." I knew, however, that that was only a test, and I reasserted my conviction. On which the Chancellor gave me two such severe blows with a stick on the back that I could have cried out with the pain, but I restrained myself, remembering that this was a usual ceremony of old-time chivalry, when one was inducted into a high position, and in Spain the laws of chivalry prevail up to the present day. When I was alone, I determined to study state affairs. I discovered that Spain and China are one and the same country, and it is only through ignorance that people regard them as separate kingdoms. I advise everyone urgently to write down the word Spain on a sheet of paper. He will see that it is quite the same as China. But I feel much annoyed by an event which is about to take place tomorrow, for at 7 o'clock the earth is going to sit on the moon. This is foretold by the famous English chemist Wellington. To tell the truth, I often felt uneasy when I thought of the excessive brittleness and fragility of the moon. The moon is generally repaired in Hamburg, and very imperfectly. It's done by a lame cooper, an obvious blockhead who has no idea how to do it. He took wax thread and olive oil. Hence that pungent smell over all the earth which compels people to hold their noses. And this makes the moon so fragile that no men can live on it, but only noses. Therefore we cannot see our noses, because they're on the moon. When I now pictured to myself how the earth, that massive body, would crush our noses to dust if it sat on the moon, I became so uneasy that I immediately put on my shoes and stockings and hastened into the council hall to give the police orders to prevent the earth sitting on the moon. The grandees with the shorn heads, whom I met in great numbers in the hall, were very intelligent people, and when I exclaimed, "Gentlemen, Let us save the moon, for the earth is going to sit on it. They all set to work to fulfill my imperial wish, and many of them clambered up the wall in order to take the moon down. At that moment the imperial chancellor came in. As soon as he appeared, they all scattered, but I alone, as king, remained. To my astonishment, however, the chancellor beat me with a stick and drove me to my room. So powerful are ancient customs in Spain. January in the same year, following after February. I could never understand what kind of country this Spain really is. The popular customs and rules of court etiquette are quite extraordinary. I do not understand them at all. Today my head was shorn, although I exclaimed as loudly as I could that I did not want to be a monk. What happened afterwards, when they began to let cold water trickle on my head, I do not know. I have never experienced such hellish torments. I nearly went mad, and they had difficulty in holding me. The significance of this strange custom is entirely hidden from me. It's a very foolish and unreasonable one. Nor can I understand the stupidity of the kings who have not done away with it before now. Judging by all the circumstances, it seems to me as though I'd fallen into the hands of the Inquisition, and as though the man whom I took to be the Chancellor was the Grand Inquisitor. But yet I cannot understand how the king could fall into the hands of the Inquisition. The affair may have been arranged by France, especially Polignac. He's a hound, that Polignac. He's sworn to compass my death, and now he's hunting me down. But I know, my friend, that you're only a tool of the English. They are clever fellows, and have a finger in every pie. All the world knows that France sneezes when England takes a pinch of snuff. The 25th. Today the Grand Inquisitor came into my room. When I heard his steps in the distance, I hid myself under a chair. When he did not see me, he began to call. At first he called, "Poprishchin." I made no answer. Then he called, "Akanti Ivanovitch, titular councillor, nobleman." I still kept silence. "Ferdinand VIII, King of Spain." I was on the point of putting out my head, but I thought, "No, brother, you shall not deceive me. You shall not pour water on my head again." But he'd already seen me and drove me from under the chair with his stick. The cursed stick really hurts one. But the following discovery compensated me for all the pain, i.e. that every cock has his Spain under his feathers. The Grand Inquisitor went angrily away and threatened me with some punishment or other. I felt only contempt for his powerless spite, for I know that he only works like a machine, like a tool of the English. 34 March, February 349. No, I have no longer power to endure. Oh God, what are they going to do with me? They pour cold water on my head. They take no notice of me and seem neither to see nor hear. Why do they torture me? What do they want from one so wretched as myself? What can I give them? I possess nothing. I cannot bear all their tortures. My head aches as though everything were turning round in a circle. Save me. Carry me away. Give me 3 steeds swift as the wind. Mount your seat, coachman. Ring bells, gallop horses, and carry me straight out of this world. Farther, ever farther, till nothing more is to be seen. Oh, heaven bends over me already. A star glimmers in the distance. The forest with its dark trees in the moonlight rushes past. A bluish mist floats under my feet. Music sounds in the cloud. On the one side is the sea, on the other, Italy. Beyond I also see Russian peasants' houses. Is not my parents' house there in the distance? Does not my mother sit by the window? Oh, mother, mother, save your unhappy son! Let a tear fall on his aching head. See how they torture him. Press the poor orphan to your bosom. He has no rest in this world. They hunt him from place to place. Mother, mother, have pity on your sick child. And do you know that the Bey of Algiers has a wart under his nose? End of Memoirs of a Madman by Nikolai Gogol. The Ambitious Guest by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Reyto. The Ambitious Guest by Nathaniel Hawthorne. One September night, a family had gathered round their hearth, and piled it high with the driftwood of mountain streams, the dry cones of the pine, and the splintered ruins of great trees that had come crashing down the precipice. Up the chimney roared the fire, and brightened the room with its broad blaze. The faces of the father and mother had a sober gladness. The children laughed. The eldest daughter was the image of happiness at 17, and the aged grandmother who sat knitting in the warmest place was the image of happiness grown old. They had found the herb heart's ease in the bleakest spot of all New England. This family were situated in the notch of the White Hills, where the wind was sharp throughout the year and pitilessly cold in the winter, giving their cottage all its fresh inclemency before it descended on the valley of the Saco. They dwelt in a cold spot and a dangerous one, for a mountain towered above their heads so steep that the stones would often rumble down its sides and startle them at midnight. The daughter had just uttered some simple jest that filled them all with mirth, when the wind came through the notch and seemed to pause before their cottage, rattling the door with a sound of wailing and lamentation before it passed into the valley. For a moment it saddened them, though there was nothing unusual in the tones. But the family were glad again when they perceived that the latch was lifted by some traveller, whose footsteps had been unheard amid the dreary blast which heralded his approach, and wailed as he was entering, and went moaning away from the door. Though they dwelt in such a solitude, these people held daily converse with the world. The romantic pass of the Notch is a great artery, through which the lifeblood of internal commerce is continually throbbing, between Maine on one side and the Green Mountains and the shores of the St. Lawrence on the other. The stagecoach always drew up before the door of the cottage. The wayfarer, with no companion but his staff, paused here to exchange a word that the sense of loneliness might not utterly overcome him ere he could pass through the cleft of the mountains, or reach the first house in the valley. And there the teamster on his way to Portland Market would put up for the night, and, if a bachelor, might sit an hour beyond the usual bedtime and steal a kiss from the mountain maid at parting. It was one of those primitive taverns where the traveller pays only for food and lodging, but meets with a homely kindness beyond all price. When the footsteps were heard, therefore, between the outer door and the inner one, the whole family rose up, grandmother, children, and all, as if about to welcome some one who belonged to them, and whose fate was linked with theirs. The door was opened by a young man. His face at first wore the melancholy expression, almost despondency, of one who travels a wild and bleak road at nightfall and alone, but soon brightened up when he saw the kindly warmth of his reception. He felt his heart spring forward to meet them all, from the old woman who wiped a chair with her apron to the little child that held out its arms to him. One glance and smile placed the stranger on a footing of innocent familiarity with the eldest daughter. "Ah, this fire is the right thing," cried he, "especially when there is such a pleasant circle around it. I am quite benumbed, for the Notch is just like the pipe of a great pair of bellows. It has blown a terrible blast in my face all the way from Bartlett." "Then you're going towards Vermont?" asked the master of the house, as he helped to take a light knapsack off the young man's shoulders. "Yes, to Burlington and far enough beyond," replied he. "I meant to have been at Ethan Crawford's tonight, but a pedestrian lingers along such a road as this. It is no matter, for when I saw this good fire and all your cheerful faces, I felt as if you'd kindled it on purpose for me, and were waiting my arrival. So I shall sit down among you and make myself at home." The frank-hearted stranger had just drawn his chair to the fire, when something like a heavy footstep was heard without, rushing down the steep side of the mountain as with long and rapid strides, and taking such a leap in passing the cottage as to strike the opposite precipice. The family held their breath because they knew the sound, and their guest held his by instinct. "The old mountain has thrown a stone at us for fear we should forget him," said the landlord, recovering himself. "He sometimes nods his head and threatens to come down, but we're old neighbours and agree together pretty well upon the whole. Besides, we have a sure place of refuge hard by if he should be coming in good earnest." Let us now suppose the stranger to have finished his supper of bear's meat, and by his natural felicity of manner to have placed himself on a footing of kindness with the whole family, so that they talked as freely together as if he belonged to their mountain brood. He was of a proud yet gentle spirit, haughty and reserved among the rich and great, but ever ready to stoop his head to the lowly cottage door, and be like a brother or a son at the poor man's fireside. In the household of the Notch he found warmth and simplicity of feeling, the pervading intelligence of New England, and a poetry of native growth which they had gathered, when they little thought of it, from the mountain peaks and chasms, and at the very threshold of their romantic and dangerous abode. He had travelled far and alone. His whole life, indeed, had been a solitary path, for, with the lofty caution of his nature, he had kept himself apart from those who might otherwise have been his companions. The family, too, though so kind and hospitable, had that consciousness of unity among themselves and separation from the world at large, which in every domestic circle should still keep a holy place, where no stranger may intrude. But this evening a prophetic sympathy impelled the refined and educated youth to pour out his heart before the simple mountaineers, and constrained them to answer him with the same free confidence. And thus it should have been. Is not the kindred of a common fate a closer tie than that of birth? The secret of the young man's character was a high and abstracted ambition. He could have borne to live an undistinguished life, but not to be forgotten in the grave. Yearning desire had been transformed to hope, and hope, long cherished, had become like certainty, that, obscurely as he journeyed now, a glory was to beam on all his pathway, though not perhaps while he was treading it. But when posterity should gaze back into the gloom of what was now the present, they would trace the brightness of his footsteps, brightening as meaner glories faded, and confess that a gifted one had passed from his cradle to his tomb with none to recognize him. "As yet," cried the stranger, his cheek glowing and his eye flashing with enthusiasm, "as yet I have done nothing. Were I to vanish from the earth to-morrow, none would know so much of me as you, that a nameless youth came by at nightfall from the valley of the Saco, and opened his heart to you in the evening, and passed through the Notch by sunrise, and was seen no more. Not a soul would ask, who was he? Whither did the wanderer go? But I cannot die till I have achieved my destiny. Then let death come. I shall have built my monument." There was a continual flow of natural emotion gushing forth amid abstracted reverie, which enabled the family to understand this young man's sentiments, though so foreign from their own. With quick sensibility of the ludicrous, he blushed at the ardour into which he had been betrayed. "You laugh at me," said he, taking the eldest daughter's hand and laughing himself. "You think my ambition as nonsensical as if I were to freeze myself to death on the top of Mount Washington, only that people might spy at me from the country round about. And truly that would be a noble pedestal for a man's statue." "It's better to sit here by this fire," answered the girl, blushing, "and be comfortable and contented, though nobody thinks about us." "I suppose," said her father, after a fit of musing, "there is something natural in what the young man says, and if my mind had been turned that way, I might have felt just the same. It is strange, wife, how his talk has set my head running on things that are pretty certain never to come to pass." "Perhaps they may," observed the wife. "Is the man thinking what he will do when he is a widower?" "No, no," cried he, repelling the idea with reproachful kindness. "When I think of your death, Esther, I think of mine too. But I was wishing we'd had a good farm in Bartlett, or Bethlehem, or Littleton, or some other township round the White Mountains, but not where they could tumble on our heads. I should want to stand well with my neighbours, and be called squire, and sent to general court for a term or two, for a plain honest man may do as much good there as a lawyer. And when I should be grown quite an old man, and you an old woman, so as not to be long apart, I might die happy enough in my bed, and leave you all crying around me. A slate gravestone would suit me as well as a marble one, with just my name and age, and a verse of a hymn, and something to let people know that I lived an honest man and died a Christian." "There now," exclaimed the stranger, "it is our nature to desire a monument, be it slate or marble, or a pillar of granite, or a glorious memory in the universal heart of man." "We're in a strange way to-night," said the wife, with tears in her eyes. "They say it's a sign of something when folks' minds go a-wandering so. Hark to the children." They listened accordingly. The younger children had been put to bed in another room, but with an open door between, so that they could be heard talking busily among themselves. One and all seemed to have caught the infection from the fireside circle, and were outvying each other in wild wishes and childish projects of what they would do when they came to be men and women. At length the little boy, instead of addressing his brothers and sisters, called out to his mother. "I'll tell you what I wish, mother," cried he. "I want you and father and grandmam, and all of us, and the stranger too, to start right away and go and take a drink out of the basin of the flume." Nobody could help laughing at the child's notion of leaving a warm bed and dragging them from a cheerful fire to visit the basin of the flume, a brook which tumbles over the precipice deep within the notch. The boy had hardly spoken when a wagon rattled along the road and stopped a moment before the door. It appeared to contain 2 or 3 men who were cheering their hearts with the rough chorus of a song, which resounded in broken notes between the cliffs, while the singers hesitated whether to continue their journey or put up here for the night. "Father," said the girl, "they're calling you by name." But the good man doubted whether they had really called him, and was unwilling to show himself too solicitous of gain by inviting people to patronize his house. He therefore did not hurry to the door, and the lash being soon applied, the travellers plunged into the notch, still singing and laughing, though their music and mirth came back drearily from the heart of the mountain. "There, mother," cried the boy again, "they'd have given us a ride to the flume." Again they laughed at the child's pertinacious fancy for a night ramble, but it happened that a light cloud passed over the daughter's spirit. She looked gravely into the fire, and drew a breath that was almost a sigh. It forced its way in spite of a little struggle to repress it. Then, starting and blushing, she looked quickly around the circle as if they'd caught a glimpse into her bosom. The stranger asked what she'd been thinking of. "Nothing," answered she with a downcast smile. "Only I felt lonesome just then." "Oh, I've always had a gift of feeling what is in other people's hearts," said he, half seriously. "Shall I tell the secrets of yours? For I know what to think when a young girl shivers by a warm hearth and complains of lonesomeness at her mother's side. Shall I put these feelings into words?" "They would not be a girl's feelings any longer if they could be put into words," replied the mountain nymph, laughing, but avoiding his eye. All this was set apart. Perhaps a germ of love was springing in their hearts, so pure that it might blossom in paradise, since it could not be matured on earth. For women worship such gentle dignity as his, and the proud, contemplative, yet kindly soul is often as captivated by simplicity like hers. But while they spoke softly, and he was watching the happy sadness, the lightsome shadows, the shy yearnings of a maiden's nature, the wind through the notch took a deeper and drearier sound. It seemed, as the fanciful stranger said, like the choral strain of the spirits of the blast, who in old Indian times had their dwelling among these mountains, and made their heights and recesses a sacred region. There was a wail along the road, as if a funeral were passing. To chase away the gloom, the family threw pine branches on their fire, till the dry leaves crackled and the flame arose, discovering once again a scene of peace and humble happiness. The light hovered about them fondly and caressed them all. There were the little faces of the children peeping from their bed apart, and here the father's frame of strength, the mother's subdued and careful mien, the high-browed youth, the budding girl, and the good old grandam, still knitting in the warmest place. The aged woman looked up from her task, and with fingers ever busy was the next to speak. "Old folks have their notions," said she, "as well as young ones. You've been wishing and planning, and letting your heads run on one thing and another, till you've set my mind a wandering too. Now what should an old woman wish for, when she can go but a step or two before she comes to her grave? Children, it will haunt me night and day, till I tell you." "What is it, mother?" cried the husband and wife at once. Then the old woman, with an air of mystery which drew the circle closer around the fire, informed them that she had provided her grave clothes some years before, a nice linen shroud, a cap with a muslin ruff, and everything of a finer sort than she had worn since her wedding day. But this evening an old superstition had strangely recurred to her. It used to be said in her younger days that if anything were amiss with a corpse, if only the ruff were not smooth or the cap did not set right, the corpse in the coffin and beneath the clods would strive to put up its cold hands and arrange it. The bare thought made her nervous. "Don't talk so, grandmother," said the girl, shuddering. "Now," continued the old woman with singular earnestness, yet smiling strangely at her own folly, "I want one of you, my children, when your mother is dressed and in the coffin, I want one of you to hold a looking-glass over my face. Who knows but I may take a glimpse at myself and see whether all is right." "Old and young, we dream of graves and monuments," murmured the stranger youth. "I wonder how mariners feel when the ship is sinking, and they, unknown and undistinguished, are to be buried together in the ocean, that wide and nameless sepulchre." For a moment the old woman's ghastly conception so engrossed the minds of her hearers that a sound, abroad in the night, rising like the roar of a blast, had grown broad, deep, and terrible, before the fated group were conscious of it. The house and all within it trembled. The foundations of the earth seemed to be shaken, as if this awful sound were the peal of the last trump. Young and old exchanged one wild glance and remained an instant pale, affrighted, without utterance or power to move. Then the same shriek burst simultaneously from all their lips. The slide! The slide! The simplest words must intimate but not portray the unutterable horror of the catastrophe. The victims rushed from their cottage and sought refuge in what they deemed a safer spot, where, in contemplation of such an emergency, a sort of barrier had been reared. Alas, they had quitted their security and fled right into the pathway of destruction. Down came the whole side of the mountain in a cataract of ruin. Just before it reached the house, the stream broke into two branches, shivered not a window there, but overwhelmed the whole vicinity, blocked up the road, and annihilated everything in its dreadful course. Long ere the thunder of that great slide had ceased to roar among the mountains, the mortal agony had been endured, and the victims were at peace. Their bodies were never found. The next morning the light smoke was seen stealing from the cottage chimney up the mountainside. Within, the fire was yet smouldering on the hearth, and the chairs in a circle around it, as if the inhabitants had but gone forth to view the devastation of the slide, and would shortly return to thank heaven for their miraculous escape. All had left separate tokens by which those who had known the family were made to shed a tear for each. Who has not heard their name? The story has been told far and wide, and will forever be a legend of these mountains. Poets have sung their fate. There were circumstances which led some to suppose that a stranger had been received into the cottage on this awful night, and had shared the catastrophe of all its inmates. Others denied that there were sufficient grounds for such a conjecture. Woe for the high-souled youth, with his dream of earthly immortality, his name and person utterly unknown, his history, his way of life, his plans, a mystery never to be solved, his death and his existence equally a doubt. Whose was the agony of that death moment? End of The Ambitious Guest by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
A Carnival Jangle by Alice Dunbar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Charlene, Modeste. There is a merry jangle of bells in the air, an all-pervading sense of gestures' noise, and the flaunting vividness of royal colors. The streets swarm with humanity. Humanity in all shapes, manners, forms, laughing, pushing, jostling, crowding, a mass of men and women and children, as varied and assorted in their several individual peculiarities as ever a crowd that gathered in one locality since the days of Babel. It is Carnival in New Orleans, a brilliant Tuesday in February when the very air gives forth an ozone intensely exhilarating, making one long to cut capers. The buildings are a blazing mass of royal purple and golden yellow, national flags, bunting, and decorations that laugh in the glint of the Midas sun. The streets are a crush of jesters and maskers, Jim Crows and clowns, ballet girls and Mephistos, Indians and monkeys, of wild and sudden flashes of music, of glittering pageants and comic ones, of befeathered and belled horses, a dream of color and melody and fantasy gone wild in an effervescent bubble of beauty that shifts and changes and passes kaleidoscope-like before the bewildered eye. A bevy of bright-eyed girls and boys of that uncertain age that hovers between childhood and maturity were moving down Canal Street when there was a sudden jostle with another crowd meeting them. For a minute, there was a deafening clamor of shouts and laughter, cracking of the whips which all maskers carry, a jingle and clatter of carnival bells, and the masked and unmasked extricated themselves and moved from each other's paths. But in the confusion, a tall prince of darkness had whispered to one of the girls in the unmasked crowd, "You'd better come with us, Flo. You're wasting your time in that tame gang. Slip off, they'll never miss you. We'll get you a rig and show you what life is." And so it happened. When a half-hour passed, the bright-eyed bevy missed Flo and couldn't find her. Wisely giving up the search at last, she, the quietest and most bashful of the lot, was being initiated into the mysteries of what life is. Down Bourbon Street and on Toulouse and St. Peter Streets, there are quaint little old-world places where one may be disguised effectually for tiny consideration. Thither, guided by the shapely Mephisto and guarded by the team of jockeys and ballet girls, tripped Flo into one of the lowest-ceiled, dingiest, and most ancient-looking of these shops they stepped. "A disguise for the demoiselle," announced Mephisto to the woman who met them. She was small and wizened and old, with yellow flabby jaws, a neck like the throat of an alligator, and straight white hair that stood from her head uncannily stiff. "But the demoiselle wishes to appear a boy? Un petit garçon?" she inquired, gazing eagerly at Flo's long, slender frame. Her voice was old and thin, like the high quavering of an imperfect tuning fork, and her eyes were sharp as talons in their grasping glance. "Mademoiselle does not wish such a costume," gruffly responded Mephisto. "Ma foi, there is no other," said the ancient, shrugging her shoulders. "But one is left now. Mademoiselle would make a fine troubadour." "Flo," said Mephisto, "it's a daredevil scheme. Try it. No one will ever know it but us, and we'll die before we tell. Besides, we must. It's late, and you couldn't find your crowd." And that was why you might have seen a Mephisto and a slender troubadour of lovely form, with mandolin flung across his shoulder, followed by a bevy of jockeys and ballet girls, laughing and singing as they swept down Rampart Street. When the flash and glare and brilliancy of Canal Street have palled upon the tired eye, when it is yet too soon to go home to such a prosaic thing as dinner, and one still wishes for novelty, then it is wise to go into the lower districts. There is fancy and grotesqueness run wild in the costuming and the behavior of the maskers, such dances and whoops and leaps as these hideous Indians and devils do indulge in, such wild curvetings and long walks. In the open squares, where whole groups do congregate, it is wonderfully amusing. Then, too, there is a ball in every available hall, a delirious ball, where one may dance all day for 10 cents, dance and grow mad for joy, and never know who are your companions, and be yourself unknown. And in the exhilaration of the day, one walks miles and miles and dances and skips, and the fatigue is never felt. In Washington Square, away down where Royal Street empties its stream of children great and small into the broad channel of Elysian Fields Avenue, there was a perfect Indian powwow. With a little imagination, one might have willed away the vision of the surrounding houses and fancied oneself again in the forest, where the natives were holding a sacred riot. The square was filled with spectators, masked and unmasked. It was amusing to watch these mimic red men. They seemed so fierce and earnest. Suddenly, one chief touched another on the elbow. See that Mephisto and Troubadour over there? He whispered huskily. Yes. Who are they? I don't know the devil, responded the other quietly, but I'd know that other form anywhere. It's Leon, see? I know those white hands like a woman's and that restless head. Ha! But there may be a mistake. No, I'd know that one anywhere. I feel it is he. I'll pay him now. Ah, sweetheart, you've waited long, but you shall feast now. He was caressing something long and lithe and glittering beneath his blanket. In a masked dance, it is easy to give a death blow between the shoulders. Two crowds meet and laugh and shout and mingle almost inextricably, and if a shriek of pain should arise, it is not noticed in the din. And when they part, if one should stagger and fall bleeding to the ground, can anyone tell who has given the blow? There is nothing but an unknown stiletto on the ground. The crowd has dispersed, and masks tell no tales anyway. There is murder, but by whom? For what? Quien sabe? And that is how it happened on Carnival night. In the last mad moments of Rex's reign, a broken-hearted mother sat gazing, wide-eyed and mute, at a horrible something that lay across the bed. Outside, the long, sweet march music of many bands floated in as if in mockery, and the flash of rockets and Bengal lights illumined the dead white face of the girl troubadour. End of A Carnival Jangle by Alice Dunbar.